let's talk about challenging iterations. This is a complicated topic, so it might be a little difficult. I think players should be allowed to challenge themselves as they play your games. I think this is critical, because it's the only way they're going to find a new thing 200 hours later. If you want to have a community around your game, then you're going to have the heart of the community, or people who have played your game for hundreds of hours and are still finding something new. New Game Plus mode, not going to do it. Hard mode, not going to do it. Challenge cards, not going to do it. You need to allow them to challenge themselves, because the only way you can guarantee the players will find something new when they come back to your game in hour 500 is if you let them bring something new in with them. A self-made challenge. So, an obvious king of the self-made challenge is Pokémon. Gotta catch them all. Pokémon. Did you know you don't actually have to catch them all? Yeah, you can just play the game. In fact, catching them all is kind of a self-imposed challenge. It's not really part of the game. I guess a couple of people kind of mention it briefly, but it's basically a self-made challenge. And in fact, if you play Pokemon, you'll constantly be giving yourself challenges because Pokemon is a super easy game, and naturally you're going to want to find ways to make it spicier. I want to catch all the Pokemon, self-made challenge. I want to catch a shiny version of my favorite Pokemon, self-made challenge. I want this Pichu to be in my party as a Pichu throughout the whole game, never changing him into a Pikachu. Self-made challenge. All of these are ways for the player to make the game their own. Because the game is easy, they can adjust the game by manually making it harder, by manually taking on new challenges. I want my team to get through this next gym even though they're the wrong type, and I can find a way to do that. It's a self-built challenge. Now those are all imposed by the person actively playing the game on themselves, right? But that's not the only kind of challenge there is. There's also a community challenge. If you've played Pokemon, you've certainly heard of Nuzlocke challenges. I don't know whether you've ever watched a Nuzlocke challenge or, heard about it in great detail, but if you have, it changes how you interpret the game. Just knowing the specifics of how a Nuzlocke challenge works will change how you interpret the game, even if you're not doing a Nuzlocke challenge. Congratulations, you have made the game feel more new and fresh, even though you haven't added anything to it. You're not playing it in a new way. You're just interpreting it in a slightly new way, because now you know how a Nuzlocke run would have gone in this situation. This monster is what I would have chosen if I was doing a Nuzlocke run. Or, if I was doing a Nuzlocke run, I would have just lost. Or whatever. I believe that this is why Pokemon succeeded. It's not the cute monsters. Virtually every game has cuter monsters than Pokemon these days. It's not the ability to hang out with your cutes. A lot of games allow you to have a bunch of pets and hang out with them. It's the fact that you can customize your experience as a solo player or as part of a community. You can constantly find something new in a Pokemon game because that's how they're built. They're built to allow you to constantly find something new with self-made challenges. Now, why is Pokemon all about the self-made challenges, but Final Fantasy isn't? Most other RPGs aren't. Why is there no Nuzlocke mode for Final Fantasy 15? Where's our Final Fantasy 15 Nuzlocke? Come on! Well, the answer is... here. Iteration. As you might know, as you play through Pokemon, you constantly change out your party for new Pokemon. And this is something where, as you move through the game, there is a fair amount of randomness as to what happens next. Exactly what Pokemon are you going to encounter next, in what order, where. But unlike a normal game where your random encounters are things to kill, in Pokemon, your random encounters are things that will change your party, or could, in theory, if you wanted them to. You can iterate on your core engine, on your core party, on your core battle system every single time you encounter a new battle, because that new battle contains people that could be on your side. You could recruit them. You could make them into part of your team. So there is no forced trajectory in your Pokemon game. If you want to go through Pokemon with nothing but birds, you can. You just recruit only birds. If you want your Pokemon game to be every time you encounter a new monster, you can only catch the first one you see and then they have to be added to your party, you can do that. The game will change dramatically because the challenges you face will change dramatically, and that will change how you adapt your party. Because the challenges you face are also opportunities to change your party. Final Fantasy doesn't do that. Final Fantasy 15, you have a boy band, and that is your boy band, and it doesn't matter what challenges you encounter, you have that boy band. Yeah, you can make the game harder by not using magic or by not using items or whatever, but you can't make the game iterative. Not in the way that Pokemon is. Every fight you get in might be super difficult because you have changed the rules to make it super difficult. But it's not going to let you adjust your party in a new way. Because your party is your party and your enemies are your enemies. It's all pre-programmed. Now obviously we could do a randomizer. Plenty of games still survive based on that. But we're talking about the core game itself. Final Fantasy, the core game, is very strict. Because the act of playing the core game is an act of exploring the characters that the game gives you. Both in terms of their stories and in terms of how they grow over time statistically. That's not the core story of Pokemon. The core story of Pokemon is you run into a whole bunch of random wild animals, which ones do you want? So we constantly iterate in Pokemon. Our challenges are iterative. When we face a new challenge, we can change out our team. Final Fantasy? Not the case. In fact, it's not the case in almost any other game. You might know, you might be thinking, well, I know that some games do have common challenge modes that aren't just speed runs, but I'm not so sure that, I understand what the difference is. Why do some games have it and some games don't? Why does Persona not have a Nuzlocke mode that why isn't it like every Persona video you find is Nuzlocke Persona? What's the difference? Well, the difference is that in Persona, you have 2 slots that are taken up by people that have static progressions, that will always have static progressions, and you got 1 slot for your monster. So even if you did a Nuzlocke mode in Persona, you would only be changing that 1 slot. So you have to play with a lot of gears broken just to get enough focus to even start challenging yourself. You got to be like, okay, well, we're not going to go down with other characters. We're going to go down solo, and we're going to go down solo with, these rules about who we can use as our Persona stacks and stuff like that. It's a lot more hoops to jump through. And that means that even though Persona is fairly popular, the challenge modes are pretty anemic. There's not really a huge community around challenging different Persona games. But there are games where challenge modes, custom challenge modes, are a huge part of the community, even though the games are not popular. Kerbal. The famous strategy RPG Kerbal. No, obviously it's a spaceship game. Now, until Kerbal ruined itself using career mode, challenges were all we had. Self-made challenges were all we had. We didn't have a limit on what we could build. We could build anything we wanted. We could go anywhere we wanted, right? But despite that, Kerbal immediately started showing a community where the community was agreeing just naturally on the challenges that you should be doing. Everybody was like, yeah, okay, so the first challenge I did was to go to the moon. And virtually everybody says that. I mean, obviously, getting into space might be your first challenge, but the first thing you do intentionally is you go to the moon. Why? Because it's there, and you can see it. There's a moon. Oh my God, let's go there. And then another challenge would be like, oh, well, Jewel is a super cool distant planet with a bunch of moons around it. I wonder if I could visit all of Jewel's moons in one go. Is that a community challenge? Did the community pick up on that? Yeah, it's called a Jewel Tour. Everybody knows about it, and everybody has tried it if they've tried Kerbal. Now, Kerbal doesn't have like a challenge mode in the game, or at least it didn't. There's no reason for you to go to Jewel. There's no reason for you to tour Jewel's moons. There's no reason for you to go to any moon. But it's there. And so you have this set of gears, the planets of Kerbal. They move in their specific way, and they're, specific distances apart. They're very, very rigid. There's no randomness at all. And you have to bridge these gaps by building a spaceship that locks the Kerbal gear together with the Jewel gear, and then build more spaceship so that it locks together with all of the Jewel's Moon's gears. You build this progression where you've got these pieces that are distant, and you've got to connect them. You've got to find a way to progress. Now, obviously, this iteration is a little bit different than the iteration in something like Pokémon. Because in Pokémon, you have a 50-hour experience that is one contiguous thing. In Kerbal, every mission is its own thing. But you still have the same basic idea. You start over with a new mission, and you look out over the vast cosmos of Kerbal, and you're like, I want to try this. And you find a new way to make that happen. I want to go to the moon with just solid rocket boosters. These challenges suggest themselves via the formation of the game's gears. In this case, it's the world. The world moves in specific ways. The universe, the solar system moves in a specific way. And you pick out which of those gears you want to engage today. In the exact same way that a Nuzlocke run says, I don't want the item gear. I don't want the healing gear. I don't want the catching gear, except for the tiniest bit that I need to take to make this work. You do the same thing in Kerbal. I want to go to Jewel using nothing but a solid rocket booster. I want to go to an outer planet and build a giant space station there. Whatever challenge you face, you're picking which gears get engaged. But in Kerbal's case, the gears are not monsters and not mechanics that you use to interact with monsters. They're planets and spaceship pieces. But it's the same basic setup. Iterate, iterate, iterate. New gears, new plans, new ideas, new formations to get there. And I think that basically any kind of game can do this. You can have a Final Fantasy game that allows this sort of thing to happen. You just got to make sure that the thing the player wants to build is something that can change over the course of the game. Something that gets replaced as you move along the game. In a Final Fantasy example, right? Final Fantasy, the most famous Final Fantasy X2. In fact, it's so famous that I'm not actually sure that we're talking about Final Fantasy X2 here, but I think we are. It's the one where you play dress up. This is a good example of how a Final Fantasy game could do this, because you can play challenge mode Final Fantasy X2 just wear the one dress, or Final Fantasy X2, you have to wear only the dress that you most recently found. You can do that because the power of transforming yourself essentially lets you create a new party, a new engine out of pieces that you find as you progress through the game. Now, you can't do that with, say, Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate, the thief is always going to level up like a thief levels up. You can change it a little bit, but he's going to be a thief the whole time. And if you find a cool new weapon, you can't just give it to him because he probably can't use it. And if he could use it, he'd suck so badly there'd be no point. So, if you're playing through Baldur's Gate 3 and you find a magic whip +8 in a corner somewhere and you're like, oh, I really want to play the game using that magic whip +8 now that I found it. Well, screw you. You don't have a character that can use a magic whip. And you can't adjust. So the idea here, behind my obsession at least, when the game offers you random things or evolving things, you need to be able to adjust your entire setup to take advantage of that new thing in order for it to allow for challenging iteration. And that seems like a strange thing to do when you're just building the game. Like, if you're building an RPG and you put the option to discover a magic whip there, and then a player does, it would be bizarre just to think, well, that means the player should now focus on that magic whip. You normally think, well, this is handy if the player needs a magic whip, if they've already built, a character set that could use it. Otherwise, they'll just sell it for cash, right? But selling it for cash is the most boring possible thing you can do. Instead, let them pivot. Let them pivot to use the new toy. And guess what? Now it can support challenge modes. You have to use the next weapon you find. The game doesn't force you to do that. The community said so. It's this ability to iterate, to change your core engine, your core battle setup, your core mechanism, whatever it is. You need to be able to iterate it. You need to be able to change it. Not just like, I went up a level and got the same thing I always get when I go up a level, but on a core level, you have to be able to view what is happening in the game and adjust. Really adjust. So that you can take into account that the game is offering you new opportunities as it's offering you new challenges. Maybe. I'm sort of still thinking about it. Anyway, maybe you enjoyed this video. If not, sorry. Bye.